Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Mindful Constitution podcast. I almost said the Tiny Health podcast. So,
Fun.
yeah. Jumping ahead, we do have a very special guest today, Cheryl Hoy, who is the founder and CEO of Tiny Health Microbiome Testing. And what makes tiny health actually really unique in the market is that it's a used for families and one of the first microbiome testing of its kind that we can use for children and infants, which is really exciting. And I can't wait to dig into the inspiration behind the creation of the business, which is based on Cheryl's experience as a mother. So I want to first start by just saying welcome, Cheryl. How are you
Hi,
today?
I'm great, Katie. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited to dig into all things gut health and just how important it is. Cheryl and I talked a little bit before we hopped on the call too about the clientele I work with, which is Sober Curiosity. And I didn't know, but Cheryl also said that she doesn't drink much more either. So we're going to talk about her own Sober Curious path, her
Mhm.
entrepreneurial journey, her motherhood journey, and her creation of tiny health. So, for starters, I just want to talk about your journey with motherhood and how that inspired the development of tiny health.
Yeah, for sure. Before starting Tiny Health, was already an entrepreneur. I started a couple of other companies. And so I was taking a break in between the last company. It started because I had my first kid, Charlie. She was born by a C-section. She was breached. And that was really what spurred me into researching, gut health, because I was curious about where she got her microbiome from and learned that babies are sterile in the womb. So babies in the womb don't have a gut bacteria, and they get the first colonization at birth. During the labor, they first get the mom's vaginal microbes through a vaginal birth, and then gut microbes from some fecal fluid during labor, and then through breastfeeding post birth, mom can continue transferring gut bacteria to infant. So C-section obviously bypasses that vaginal canal, and babies born that way are missing certain bacteria. And then secondarily, babies are exposed to mom's antibiotics during the C-section operation, which could also impair their gut bacteria. So I was reading about the literature around that and learned that babies who have a different gut through the C-section birth may have a higher risk of this allergic progression of allergic diseases called atopic march, which starts with eczema and may morph into food allergies and asthma by age 6, and then hay fever as an adult. Basically, really just emphasizing that these early microbes that colonize infants at birth are responsible for training their immune system. So this progression of allergic disease is a sign that their immune system at birth wasn't quite trained correctly. So
Mhm.
their immune system is haphazardly responding to skin allergens, environmental allergens, respiratory allergens, which is what eczema, food allergies, asthma are all kind of about, right? So I
Mhm.
learned all that, and then my daughter ended up getting eczema around 6 months, food sensitivities to gluten, dairy, and all that stuff. A lot of, like she was colicky, had sleep issues and things like that. So when I was pregnant with my son, 2 years after my daughter was born, I was worried about him. He was breached as well. And I was worried about a second C-section. And I started Tiny Health a week after he was born because I really wanted to look into his gut if there were imbalances that I can course correct early on. And I actually happened to have a VBAC with him, vaginal birth
Oh, you
at
did?
home. Yeah, I had a home VBAC, which is crazy. And at the time in California, was frowned upon a little bit, but
Yeah. How'd you find a midwife that would accept you? Was it challenging?
no, I mean, there
Yeah.
are midwives.
Yeah, lots of them, right? I know. I think a lot of people like VBACs are, from what I've read, it's, almost it's people think like VBACs are really risky, but a second cesarean is also really risky, right? To go in major surgery and into the same incision and all of that. Like it's more risky than just the first cesarean when you're having a multiples.
I think this is a personal, you have to go on your personal journey and
Mhm.
research the facts. To me, I personally feel like another major operation is a higher risk to me and my baby than having a VBAC, right?
Mhm.
Everything else was normal about my birth. It was just a breach, really.
Mhm.
Uh, and so to me, like there was no reason why I wouldn't attempt it. And there's definitely a lot of stories that people can tell you about, really scary cases of, things happening at home and things like that. Again, I think I learn to advocate for my own health, my own child's health, and to not take everything that the doctor tells you at face value. I research my own, and so I ended up making a lot of decisions on my own. Of course, I consulted with practitioners and my midwives and things like that. But ultimately, I felt confident and safe with my choices. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of Tiny Health, eventually, when we created Tiny Health, is about empowering parents with the data, right? Instead of like, it's not about fear, it's never about guilt tripping, C-section or formula feeding or whatever. It's about, well, if you do end up with a C-section like I did with my daughter, you want to check in and see what you can do about it. Because the thing with it is that you can do something about your gut microbiome. And there's a tiny window, especially in your infant, your child, in which that the bacteria is training your baby's immune system, as I mentioned. And so past that time window, it's just the programming, the immune training is set, and it's just
Mhm.
hard to change that. Doesn't mean you can't change an older kid's or an adult's gut microbiome. You can. It just takes a lot more discipline. And the
Yeah.
early programming, arguably, is really the area where you can prevent chronic conditions and even reverse some of the chronic conditions facing our kids more and more today. So I was really about like, if there are evidence-based interventions that you can do that, isn't going to be, like it's not experimental, like it's not it can only heal your baby's gut, then why not offer that to parents, offer that insight? And ultimately, a lot of our reports are showing you what's in your child's gut, what's in your gut as a mom or dad or older kid, and then a list of options from a dietary nutrition perspective, supplements that are age appropriate. Most of them are clinically backed, or lifestyle changes, educating parents about maybe overuse of antibiotic soap or hand sanitizers and toxic cleaning supplies, and your baby's kind of licking all that and into their system. So educating parents about that, the lifestyle component is an important piece too. Ultimately, it's your choice. We give you the information and the literature behind that, and then you decide what you want to do about it.
Yeah. I love what you said about the empowerment piece because I think, well, for starters, just to kind of like consolidate what you just said, and you correct me if I'm wrong. And the gut microbiome is comprised of bacteria that communicates and lays the foundation for the functioning of our immune system. And unfortunately, with cesarean sections, the integrity of the microbiome can be a bit compromised. However, with empowering information through microbiome tests, through Tiny Health, we can kind of optimize that within the first, couple months of life when it's a bit more malleable than it would be if we waited. So there's ways to actually address some of those compromisations. And again, like you said, no shame to either way that you give birth, more just about empowering you with all the options if you have a circumstance where you do need to get a cesarean.
Mhm.
Um, and that's the way that your birth path unfolds, then there's ways that you can address this. And one thing you also talked about is just the really big link between a compromised microbiome and the emergence of chronic disease at a uh, higher incidence through
Mhm.
life.
Yeah.
And especially things related, allergies, et cetera, related to immune functioning, which
Yeah.
a lot is. And then
One
you,
in two kids, like the stats is almost one in two kids,
yeah.
according to the CDC, has a chronic condition today, at least one chronic condition. And that's like not, it's becoming almost like normal, but that new normal is not okay. It doesn't mean it's okay for
Right.
kids to be that sick, right?
Yeah, I know, and it is scary how we adapt and it just becomes normal, and then it's you kind of wake up and you're like, "Wait a second. This is not normal. Hello." Should we
And a
be
colic
sounding the
baby.
alarm? Yeah,
Yeah, the protein allergy, those are all not normal. It shouldn't
yeah.
happen for kids. Yeah.
Right. And another thing you said too was not, empowering yourself, becoming your own health advocate and not taking, obviously medical professionals are trained. There's a lot of credence to be given to the educational training they have. However, you noted that you didn't take everything for face value. And I'm curious if there was ever a moment for you that had like an aha moment, like, oh, this doctor is a doctor, but not God, and I can still participate in this practitioner-patient relationship and take their opinion and research. Like, where was there a specific moment you remember where you kind of
Yeah, for sure. I think I was in my second trimester with my daughter, my first child. And again, like medical professionals definitely has its place. And I do have a doctor I go to for things that we need help with. For example, I think you do all these tests during pregnancy. I think my urine test came back higher in a certain bacteria that maybe kind of it's a precursor to UTI. Now, I didn't have any UTI yet at that point, but just in case, my doctor gave me antibiotics in my
Mm,
second trimester. And this is before I started Tiny Health. And I was very curious about gut health, but I didn't know the details. And so I took it. And midway through taking the antibiotic, I actually got UTI because now I know that the antibiotic probably killed all my good bacteria as well, in addition to the bad bacteria. And then she had to switch me to a stronger dose of
mm,
antibiotics. And so then I was like curious, like, well, is this supposed to happen? Like, what if I had, instead of going to antibiotics first, especially when I wasn't symptomatic, I could have done, there's now is it manganese, or I can't remember the technical name of it. But there are supplements that you can take for the extract of certain components from like the cranberry, right? Your mom would tell you take cranberry juice if you have a UTI. I could have done cranberry juice or that manganese or something, and taken that more holistic approach first and
mhm.
see come down before I jumped to antibiotics. So that's a very good example of what I wish I had done uh, when I learned about that bacteria being high instead of jumping to the antibiotics, because that just became more and more, it became,
Right.
yeah. And then
Yeah.
after that, I didn't even supplement the probiotic. Nobody told me to. So like it might have destroyed my good bacteria, and I left it at that, and I didn't.
And not to mention you're creating the microbiome you're about to pass on, you're pregnant. It's
Mm,
interesting when there's that abundance of precaution on one end, but then it seems like there's sometimes not on the other end. So, for example, with that being very an abundance of precaution to prescribe the medication because of perhaps the maybe potential of UTI, but no, like, but what about the abundance of precaution for the side effects of the antibiotics and the aftermath, you know? So
mhm.
it's interesting where we see it sometimes and other times not. And so, yeah,
Mhm.
thanks
I
for sharing.
understand, like, medical professionals want to like prevent a lot of things from happening, bad things from happening, right?
Mhm.
So, and then in medical school, they're not taught about the microbiome or the balance of good and bad bacteria in your gut restoration. I think there's certainly more awareness now. I mean, I'm hoping there is. But this is where I think anytime you're being prescribed any sort of medication or even supplements, frankly, I would do my own research to determine the dose and all that, like, just validating that, and or work with in conjunction with a midwife or a functional practitioner just to get like people who are trained in nutrition and diet, and maybe like approaches that are not necessarily medication. For example, there could be other approaches from
Yeah.
dietary supplement. Yeah.
And it just gives you more of a varied perspective where you can then kind of make your own, draw your own conclusions and find the path that works best for you if you're willing to like invest that time and energy. Because I think sometimes we do get, one opinion from a doctor and we think like, okay, the doctor said, as opposed to like, okay, this actually isn't the end all be all. There's more
Mhm.
options. This is just one approach. That's a very specific form of training with pharmacology being usually the first line of defense. And so you can, while
Yeah.
that's helpful at times, it's not always what everyone wants to do too. So,
Yeah. And I'm sure you can check in, like, look, I researched this. Can I take this in place of the antibiotics? I'm sure your doctor will say, okay, it's
mm,
up to you. Like, even like things like mastitis, right? Postpartum, we might jump straight to antibiotics, but there are actually probiotics we found clinically shown to actually help with mastitis. So you can actually take a probiotic instead of an antibiotic to solve mastitis, which a lot of people don't know. For
mm-hmm.
whatever indication you have, like I would just encourage you to see if there are alternative methods that you can do before jumping to antibiotics. I think like antibiotics are really great when you do have an active infection that's bacterial, not viral. Again, very important to differentiate. I think a lot of times if you have an infection, they're just assumed to be bacterial and you're throwing an antibiotic, but if it's viral, then it's going to be completely useless, right? So I
And
think
harmful. Yeah.
harmful. And then so we as patients and also like medical practitioners just have to be better stewards of antibiotic use to really question, is this really necessary? Can I do other things before I jump to antibiotics? Because I think coming back to the early life immune training, the thing that is supposed to colonize the infant's gut in the first year in high quantities, like 80-90%, is bifidobacteria. So this probiotic called bifidobacteria, I actually have a little stuffy here. This is what it
Ah,
looks like. It's a Y, and most people, including adults, like maybe you and me, are deficient of bifidobacteria because it's very sensitive to antibiotics. So once antibiotics come and kind of kill your bad and good bacteria, if you don't take care to restore these bifs, it may never reappear. And especially in kids where kids do get ear infections and they're also the first line of treatment is antibiotics. If you don't take care in restoring that, they may never come back. So these are really important to train your immune system. Now, like we talked about C-section births and all that. And certainly, this is one bacteria that doesn't get transferred through a C-section birth. But then we also get, a lot, not a lot, but say around 30% of vaginally born breastfed infants who have eczema and some symptoms, and their gut has zero bifidobacteria either. And so then we're like, oh, well, then a lot of moms come to us, well, I had a vaginal birth, I breastfed exclusively. Like, what's wrong? Why is my kid's gut so bad? And when we do have mom sample, unfortunately, we do oftentimes see that mom is completely deficient of BIFs as well.
so she and probably even before our pregnancy or whatnot, like because it's just the transference of her microbiome to the baby. So she was probably not in the best state prior to conception. I have a question too about I know sometimes they do the transplant. Have you heard of that? The like tongue
Happened.
swabs for
Oh,
babies.
the vaginal swab. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I did that.
What do you think of those?
Well, so that's what I really researched, when I was diving into the research for my daughter, because I'm like, she's breech, like, I would try a vaginal birth because I knew the labor is also healthy for her, even if I had to
Mm.
end
See,
up with an emergency. Like it's never truly an emergency. It takes an hour to prep, right? So there is, room for trying going through labor, which again has a lot of benefits to the infant, including some seeding happening in that vaginal canal and then C-section. So what I did was I did do the vaginal seeding in which you put a gauze, you would ask your midwife to do it because most OBs are still not really, willing to do it. Some of them are, but you would during the OR prep stage, you would put a gauze in your vaginal canal to soak up the vaginal fluids. And within 2 minutes of the baby being born by a C-section, you swab it on their face and their mouths to mimic that vaginal kind of like transfer.
mm.
So there are two studies now, the last one being a much larger study, I believe over 100 women, showing that babies who went through that seeding look more like a vaginally born baby than C-section babies. So I did that, and I think my daughter's eczema ended up being a little bit more on the milder side of things. You never know, right? Like if I didn't do it, maybe it would be worse.
Yeah.
Uh, but it is something that you can do. But I would also check your vaginal microbiome. This is why we offer vaginal tests as well, because if your vaginal canal isn't dominated with the healthy lactobacillus microbes, then, you may not be transferring the bright microbes as
Yeah.
well, right? Through that.
Transferring the bad bacteria, going
Yeah,
through
so
the
it's just
effort. Yeah.
to be aware, like there is the gut component that is like you want the Y, you want mom to have Ys, the bifidobacteria, and not just any, you want 4 specific strains. So we point that out in our test. This is why I created Tiny Health, because I feel like the other stool tests in the market wasn't measuring what I wanted to measure, which is B. infantis, specifically B. infantis, B. breve, bifidum, and longum specifically. I know it's a mouthful, but they are, shown to be more adapted at digesting the HMOs in mom's breast milk to break down the components of breast milk to then really fully benefit the baby's immune system and immune training. So everything has to align. Mom has to have good lacto in her vaginal canal. Baby passes through that tract, gets colonized by lactobacillus microbes first, and then they disappear very quickly in the first week of life. And then that helps with the colonization of the bifs. And it should bloom to about 80–90% of the child's gut in the first year. In a lot of kids where we see a lot of symptoms, they have 0 bifs or maybe 10% bifs, or they have 50% bifs of the wrong kind that are supposed to exist more in the oral canal or somewhere else. So there could be bifs, but the wrong kinds of bifs as well, which is kind of why our test was really made to adapt to this, right balance in the early life, before 6 months, between 6 to 12 months, 12 to 2 years old. Every stage of gut development has its own kind of like, we want to see the right balance of the right microbes for immune training and catch imbalances early on if possible to course correct, so you can give your baby the best, hopefully, setup for lifelong health.
Yeah, yes, because it truly is the crux of so many things. Like we talked about the development of chronic disease, the ties to mental health, all of the things. Um, so I wanted to talk, as we're talking about imbalances, about just the kind of vast array of things that contribute to gut health or gut disease. So, can you talk about some of the environmental factors? Of course, we've been talking about birthing methods, so cesarean versus vaginal is a huge kind of foundational component of the compromisation of the compromisation of the microbiome. But what other things can you share that are particularly impactful on gut
With the infant gut?
composition?
Yeah, so birth mode, I would say, but feeding mode, which is breast milk or formula, is the maybe #1 factor after birth mode and more impactful actually. So if you take a C-section born breastfed infant versus a vaginally born exclusively formula fed with no breast milk at all, the gut of the infant that is breastfed and C-section is probably going to be better than, and we have real data to show this too, than the formula fed baby, actually, because the gut, the HMOs and ideally the bifs in the breast milk continues to support the development and immune training of the infant in the first year of life, right? You kind of gave them the best start of life with the vaginal birth, and you stop there with no breast milk, then, there's sort of like the immune training is also kind of affected there. But again, some moms can't breastfeed or they choose not to. There are formulas that are better adapted at supporting the infant's gut. So we do offer advice there on what to maybe switch to, or there are infant approved supplements that you can add, and maybe some probiotics that you can add to a formula fed infant. But I would say, broadly speaking, the nutrition the baby gets in that first 6 months is really crucial. And then 6 months, starting solids, some babies start solids too late. Some AAP guidelines or the guidelines for solids have changed quite a bit over the years, and there's confusion around how soon you need to introduce allergens or like how often to introduce new foods. And we have all of those guides in our results portal and blog posts as well that you can search. But basically, the general consensus is that people are not introducing allergens quickly enough or a variety of foods. So between 6 months to a year, you really need to diversify what you offer the kid. And, that's an important period as well. And then 6 months and on again, like exposure to nature is important, pets and animals. Sometimes we see zero unfriendly bacteria in an infant's gut. That's not good either. They're maybe
Mm,
sanitizing too clean and maybe not exposed to enough environmental microbes outside. And, the reason why pets are so good for households and, households that have pets have lower food allergies, right? And their kids have fewer food allergies is because your pets bring in the microbes from outside indoors, right? If we're
yeah.
not spending time outdoors, then your pets are doing some of the job for you, bringing that
Yeah. Yeah. And then they lick your kids in the face.
100%. Yes.
I'm like, oh, this is probably a little more than we need here, Vita. My dog loves smooching my son. But yeah, so I know that that's a bunch for the children and then even for the mom, right? Like when we're pregnant, conceiving things, obviously pregnant, like things like alcohol, stress, antibiotics, um, any things in particular that you feel strongly about with moms preparing their microbiome when they're thinking of conceiving?
Yeah, and that's why we do have a gut and vaginal test for moms. I would
Mm,
have everyone asks me, when should I do it? I'm like, as soon as possible, before you conceive, ideally, right? Because for adults, it takes longer for our microbiome to change. It takes more discipline. So it took me, I had zero BIFs and I still have zero Akkermansia. That's a really hard one to increase.
mhm,
Akkermansia is really important for metabolic health and gut lining. But BIFs, it took me 6 to 9 months of really disciplined diet and probiotic supplementation with HMOs and all that to shift that. But any medication, so like antibiotics is obviously one of them, but any other medication could have an impact. We don't know exactly what. Alcohol, certainly you're not drinking alcohol during pregnancy, but when you're trying to conceive, if you are trying to conceive, try not to drink alcohol as well, because like I know your audience is so curious, but alcohol does impact good bacteria, beneficial bacteria,
mhm,
which is why when after learning about that, I've kind of stopped drinking alcohol. I used to do the weekends, like, oh, Friday, let's open a bottle of wine. And my husband and I would finish that bottle of wine. We
mhm,
don't do that anymore.
mhm. I
Because
think it's really similar to what you said earlier with like, and I feel the same way about sober curiosity. It's like it's not about shaming people who make different choices or decide to drink or have a C-section. It's about, or, like these situations where it's like we make the choices we make. It's just nice to be able to do it fully informed. And I think with particularly alcohol culture, there's just a lot of mindless drinking that's very normalized. And we've been kind of like it's also been kind of the narrative that drinking small amounts is good for you, not just like neutral, but good. And so people have taken that and ran, right? And so I think when we realize, oh, there really isn't any amount that's good for me, particularly when you're talking about gut health and that's your area of expertise. And yeah, then you kind of go into it eyes wide open. So if you do want to drink, at least like I'm not lying to myself.
look, I still drink. I'm not gonna lie. I do the occasional wine, and if I'm at a brewery, like a wild craft beer, it's totally
Mm.
fine. But I am aware I'm doing this. And what will happen, if I drank it, like you said, right? Actually, the biggest motivator of me cutting out alcohol is since I bought my Aura ring, and
Oh,
I
the
was
sleep, right?
my sleep and how much alcohol impacts my heart rate, HRV, and my sleep quality. Because with gut, it's kind of something invisible you can't really see. So if you can't see, you can't, you may measure it once, like we recommend twice a year proactively, but that's still a long time. But with sleep, you see it instantly impacting your sleep, right?
Mhm.
And so to me, sometimes I'm just kind of like, well, if I drink earlier in the day. So I give it time to process and get through my system. I really try not to drink at night anymore because it has a severe impact to my sleep quality. It's just not worth it to me. But with that education and that awareness, I can make better choices, right? Like I think at the end of the day, we're all humans and you do what you need to do at that point of time. But again, I think that awareness of like, what it could do is important.
Yeah, exactly. And it's empowering too, because then it allows you to make a conscious choice. And it's funny you said sleep quality and HRV, like for data-driven people. I think those are the two biggest ones where people who have even a glass of wine, they're like, oh my God, I had no idea. And you mentioned before we hopped on the the Huberman Lab podcast about alcohol. That was very big in the sober curious realm. Everyone was talking about that. And
That also impacted me. Actually,
yeah.
after listening to that, I was like, look at my husband and I'm like, oh my God, it's poison. And, I think we were like, okay, again, like it's interesting. You learn these facts about what it can do, right? You know it's not good. But until you see, for me, real-time data is just so like eye-opening. Like if
Yeah.
it impacting your sleep immediately, or if you had like, I wish gut testing, stool testing is at one day could be really cheap. Like if it gets down to $50 a sample or $20 a sample, I would just sample once a week and see what factors influence my gut health, right?
Yeah.
But knowing that from literature, it kind of kills a lot of the good bacteria. I'm kind of like, well, that and my sleep, that is not worth it.
Exactly. And another thing I think was pretty groundbreaking or just new for a lot of people to hear was the effects just normal drinking has. Because so often it's talked about in like overconsumption or overindulgence or binge drinking, but he really honed in frequently in that whatever 3 hour episode on how even normal drinking, the biggest thing for me as like a highly sensitive person that I'm always trying to find like ways to regulate my nervous system and just be less overstimulated. I think knowing that it really raises our stress resilience as a baseline, even outside of drinking, I'm like, I don't need that. Especially
Yeah,
considering most people drink first to calm down. It's like it may anesthetize you like in the moment, but it's actually decreasing your stress resilience overall day to
that
day. And so
yeah. And
that was
that's the thing, right? During the week, I am so busy with tiny health and working, and I sleep less during the week. I see that. And my weekends, like Friday through Sundays, when I do try to recover and sleep more. So at the same time I'm doing the alcohol, I was doing the alcohol, then I'm not even getting the benefit of recovery on the weekend, right? And that's
yeah.
for me, it's like then no, like when is a good time to drink? Like maybe Saturday brunch. Like maybe
Yeah. You're like, I have a 2 hour window every week to have one drink.
like yeah, but not Friday night. I think certainly Friday night is
Yeah.
completely out of the story for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're perfectly exemplifying like what sober curiosity is, just like really arming yourself with the education of it and then seeing like how does this fit in my life and how is it truly impacting me and how is it, bringing me closer to the life I want or supporting my goals. And that's just like such a wonderful exploration process for anybody, no matter how much you drink. It's just like a good tool in the healing journey toolkit.
Yes.
So, yeah, I wanted to talk about we kind of talked about alcohol's impact on gut, like we all know that it's not great. But I did want to talk in the realm of gut health before we start getting out of time because we could talk about this stuff all day, I can tell. But I wanted to talk about the best ways to ensure a healthy gut. We can talk about generally speaking, adults, kids, everyone. Like, what are some of your just going down the list? Like, these are the things you should be thinking about to really optimize gut health.
Well, yeah. So like, again, like I can't stress the importance of, if you are in the reproductive kind of like age, as a woman, even as a man, because dad's gut do influence baby's gut too. So if mom was like, I talked about missing BIFs in mom and how that may not transfer to baby, even with a vaginal birth and breastfeeding. If dad had some, through kissing and all close contact, that can give that to infants too. So I would say dads, don't rule dads out.
Yeah.
Like you have to improve your gut health as a family, really. And it's a lifestyle, not a point in time. I fixed my child's gut and I'm fine. No, like your child's going to eat what you eat and do the same things you do. So I think that whole like first 1000 days, that malleable time point for immune training, that window is something to really pay attention if you're wanting to set your kids up for, hopefully no chronic conditions and a good immune system. So pay attention to that, and BIVs, Bifidobacteria archimencia are, really important. Butyrate function. Butyrate is a short chain fatty acids acid that supports the gut lining. Butyrate function during pregnancy is also really important and influences there's a gut-brain connection there too. So it may influence your baby's eventual external or internal behavior. So while the microbiome doesn't transfer from mom to baby in the womb, the gut functions of the mom do influence baby's behavior eventually. So some things to think about, like a healthy diet, even mom's gut health and vaginal health during pregnancy is important for kids' immune health. The first 1,000 days technically starts during conception. So it's in the womb through about 2, 3 years old. And then beyond that, 3 and above, when your baby can eat solids, I would prioritize fermented foods in general. Fermented foods, there are studies, the latest studies coming out of Stanford shows that fermented foods are more impactful in diversifying the gut.
Hmm.
And fiber, like fiber is also important, but fermented foods have an outsized impact. So your yogurt, and in the yogurt category, I would prioritize kefir
Hmm.
foremost because it has the most number of wild strains, and then Greek yogurt. And I would stay away from the sweet Danone yogurts that are high in sugar and more processed. I would stay away from those. But fermented foods can also be, kids don't really like, it's funny. Actually, my daughter, I fed her kefir since she was 6 months, and she actually likes sour foods now. She loves sauerkraut. And as a baby, I gave her some sauerkraut sauce, like the liquid, and mix it with some of her foods. So she kind of grew to like that taste, right? And versus my son, I wasn't as disciplined with him, and he doesn't like fermented foods as much as his sister now. But I would do, yeah, sauerkraut if they are willing to. And they're like, you can do tempeh, you can do other fermented foods, and mix it into smoothies and whatnot. And then fiber, yeah, like when it comes to fiber, a lot of people are like, oh, my bread has a lot of fiber. It's important to differentiate between the leafy green fiber, and like seeds, like hemp seeds and flax seeds versus something that's just artificially added
Mm.
to, we're like, oh, my cereal has fiber, but that fiber is different from
Whole food fiber.
food fiber.
Yeah.
And not just that, but diversity of fiber, because eating a lot of broccoli every single day from the same source isn't the same as eating 30 different kinds of plant-based foods and fiber in a week. We aim for 30 to 50 actually in our household, and we count at one point we were counting them, and we were exceeding them. So the variety is important. We also shop from different sources. Like we sometimes switch between, we can't afford farmers market every time but sometimes we do source from there. Between Whole Foods and Trader Joe's, I don't always like to shop at just Whole Foods because even the source of where the produce comes from matters for
Mm.
diversification.
I wouldn't have even thought of that, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it is just a note I think is so important too with what everything you're saying is, you don't, it's not necessarily like you want all good bacteria. It's more of the ecosystem and the proportions between good and bad you're trying to facilitate in a ideal way. And so it only makes sense that that would be facilitated by like eating the rainbow, diversifying the different things that you're eating and where you're even getting those different things, just to kind of expose your body to as much as possible in a good way. So that I never thought of kind of shopping in different places, although we kind of do that too.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Excuse me.
there's so much, right? I think I already mentioned the nature and pets component, you know, getting your babies enough dirt, like good organic healthy dirt. And there is a difference, right? Some parks do get sprayed with pesticides, so be careful of that and make sure that if you're putting your baby down in the grass, which is a healthy thing to do, make sure they're maybe in your backyard and kind of like free from any like harmful um,
Mm.
substance.
Yeah, definitely. I know. I feel like sometimes when we talk about this type of stuff, it can sound if somebody is like totally unfamiliar with diversifying like microbe exposure and things to limit and, all the different strategies, it might feel overwhelming. And I'm curious for you, even with your own family or what you encourage people to do when they're looking at all of these ways to optimize gut health. Like, how do you make it feel approachable? Because I do feel like even the food system and
Mhm.
chemicals and pollution is like there's so many things working against us that it can kind of, and I could see why, honestly, it gets to that point where people are like, I don't even care anymore because there's just like
Yeah,
everything's toxic. And so, how do you
exactly.
help people kind of digest it, no pun intended, in a
Oh,
more
this is a
manageable
really
way?
good question. I actually do have a way to manage it because I knew I was quite overwhelmed too. Everything is pretty messed up in the food supply chain and everything, right? I actually pick a season. I've actually moved from doing one thing per 6 months to one thing a quarter now. So every 3 months, I pick a thing to focus on. So this past quarter was actually my sleep, optimizing my sleep. So I like blue light blocking glasses. I switched my kids' room from blue light to amber and orange light and red light. My husband thought I was crazy, but to help them go to bed better, right? And to sleep better. I picked light and as the source for better sleep. I do eye masks and things like that. But that was like the season. Last season, I focused on EMF blockers and things like that. Shutting off my Wi-Fi when we go to bed. Like the past, early on, one of the first things I picked was plastics, no plastics. So swapping all that out, swapping out Teflon pots and pans, which I was using. And then another season, actually recently, earlier this year, the first quarter, actually, I picked water because we were getting, when we moved from California to Austin, Texas, about 2 years ago, our gut health all kind of like got worse because we do proactive testing twice a year for my whole family. And I was like, okay, maybe it's the food supply. So I started going to organic farms and picking out my meat, produce. I did raw milk. I found my farms. So I'm like, okay, let me like reset my food supply chain. But we were getting skin issues. My daughter had her eczema come back. My husband had wounds that wouldn't heal so easily. I had some skin issues. My mom had skin issues. So then we finally tested the water, and we had apparently arsenic, lead, and uranium in our water system.
Wow.
We were already filtering it with an RO system for our drinking water, but it was still in our bathing water, and we, brush our teeth, gargle with it. So we just implemented a full house filtration system. So it is, yeah, it is a lot, but if you kind of just decide like every season, pick one or two things that is enough for you to research and go deep in and test and tackle, it becomes more digestible and
I love
kind of
that.
easier to manage, right? And then knowingly, like, for example, when my son, my second born, I was microwaving plastic for all my postpartum meals for 6 weeks. And
Like,
I cringe every time I think about it. I'm like, I probably fed so much
try
plastic
plastic.
to my son at birth. Like, I'm horrified. But I try not to make myself feel guilty because at that point in time, I was working on something else, right? I was working on breastfeeding him and yada, yada, yada. And I didn't know that microplastics was
Yeah.
being in I don't even own a microwave oven anymore.
I
I
don't
don't.
mean either.
So it's like, you have to just be okay that at that point you were working with the best information you had.
Right.
It's impossible to do everything at once, but pick a season every 3 months, focus on something new, and then you just kind of like, and then you feel good about yourself because you're taking action and baby steps towards a lower tox life and a healthier life for you and your family, right?
Yeah, and I think it allows you because it can be overwhelming cost-wise, information overload-wise, and I think a lot of people got information overload and then they just get paralyzed and do nothing, where it's just so much more. And not to mention, stress negatively impacts your gut health, guys. So don't stress yourself out about it. But
100.
I love, love, love the idea of taking a few months to really inform yourself on like one area. That's genius. I'm going to start mentioning that to my clients because I think it is. It's hard and it's expensive to swap things out. Even personal, like with personal care products, I just kind of wait till I run out and then I'd get a new like upgrade to a new one. Do you
Hmm.
ever use the Yuka app?
Oh, I have it downloaded, but I don't use
Yeah.
it enough. I
Yeah,
don't.
that's a good one too. But yeah, I think it's wonderful, and then you can kind of go through it and really immerse yourself in one area and, like, maybe invest in the best quality tool for that thing too, because 'cause you're just taking it nice and slow. And yeah, it's like nothing is gonna be overhauled overnight, so just understanding it's a lifestyle, like you mentioned with gut health, it's not one and done, it's not take this, it's like we're trying to foster a colonize, a new ecosystem, and that needs continual fuel and
Yeah,
feeding to keep
yeah,
it that way, and that's in stress and diet and the way that we're living our lives.
100%. And I just thought of something really practical too, if you don't mind me sharing. If you
Yeah,
have
please
kids,
do.
like your daughter is what, 14 months?
Arthur, my son, he is
Your
14
son.
months.
Oh, and you have older kids?
No, just one kid.
Oh, just one. Okay, so your
Yeah.
your son's not at the point yet where he's attending birthday parties, but soon he will.
Yeah.
And it's one of the stressors for moms who like, are wanting a healthier diet for your kids. I'm so anal with their snacks and processed foods, right? But you're gonna have a birthday party at some point every single weekend for if you have multiple
I
kids.
know.
And so I have at least taught my daughter is the one who has sensitive gut because of the C-section, maybe, and all kind of maybe like reasons why. But every time she eats like a birthday cake with a lot of coloring, like red and green coloring or whatever, she feels she knows she doesn't feel very good about it. So I educate her about why I let her eat it. And she complains to me, Mom, my tummy is hurting. And I explain why. And she now makes the connection at 6 years old. She understands. She still wants to eat it. But then she's like, Mom, I'm gonna like this past weekend, she was like, Mom, I'm gonna scrape away the icing. I'm just gonna eat a little bit of this, but I'm gonna scrape it away. And I'm like, I felt so proud. I'm like, wow, she gets to
Yeah.
connect now. She's making her own choices. Because I'm
Yeah.
not there. And then sometimes I also negotiate with my kids. I know this party is gonna have really like store-bought cupcakes. And I told them I'm gonna make a cupcake at home. We're gonna bring it. Like if you want, I can swap it for that cupcake at the party. And they do that. They like, like my cupcakes. And I put some healthy chocolate on there, like coca beans, and it's
Mm.
all organic and it's has good sweeteners, not like artificial. And they let me swap it.
Yeah. I love that your daughter is able to kind of do that and having that conversation, educating them and allowing them to make their own choice and then see how they feel. I think that's a great way to foster intuitive eating too. Like you can have whatever you want to have. Just pay attention to how you're feeling after and the way your body's communicating to you, which is what you said even when your family moved to Austin, and it's so wild to me, and I noticed when I stopped drinking how much I was probably a much heavier drinker than most people and like more of a binge drinker, and as a baseline I never really felt that good, but like once I stopped drinking, it's like you really become in tune with your body. And I don't think we're as encouraged, from childhood onward. At least I wasn't in school or anything like that to be like, pay attention to how you're feeling after meals or during eating. What is your body telling you about that food you just ate? And connecting how we feel after we eat something. I just think our culture is so disconnected from our bodily cues and the language of our body speaking to us. And I think how many people have like low lying health issues that they've just gotten used to that could be addressed through lifestyle change, but they're not even realizing that their normal is actually kind of shitty, is that you could feel so much better.
100%, 100%. And this is where, as a parent too, you have an opportunity to teach your kid how to realize these things, right? And really tune into their diet and even drinks. Like my daughter was like, again, at the party, someone was having soda and she's like, can I have a sip? I'm like, sure you can. But after that, in the car ride home, I told her there are what, 9 spoons of sugar in that soda. And what happens when you eat 9 spoons of sugar? And I asked her questions and she answered it herself. And she's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. She's like connecting. I think
Yeah.
she's still gonna like want that soda if someone offered her, but I think over time she's gonna make that connection on her own. I want her
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah, and even when she gets older as an adult, because I think of so many things that, like, in the moment as a child, my mom was doing for my benefit, and you're like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, whatever, mom." Like, getting me the shredded wheats or whatever, again, the healthy cereal. And I used to be like, give me Lucky Charms. I want fruit leathers. I want fruit by the foot, that type of stuff. But now looking back, it's like she laid the foundation that even though at the time I kind of was influenced by my peers, but it still stuck through into adulthood. And now it's like overridden the healthy groundwork she laid has grown. And
Mm.
so, yeah, it is with with sugar and stuff like you mentioned the nine spoons. Like sometimes I'm just like, this is so wild that there's like 40 grams of sugar or something like more, a third more than our daily like allowance, which we're supposed to have of not
Yeah.
supposed to have of sugar, obviously, but the upper limit, right? And
Mhm.
so sometimes I just feel like, are they not even trying with our food system? Like zero cares given? Is it intentionally damaging? I'm not sure. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's all, if you ask me, I don't want to get into the food industrial complex, but
Yeah.
it's driven, right? We have
Yeah.
major corporations marketing Mountain Dew to college kids because it's high in caffeine and, but it does have what, 40, 50, like Mountain Dew has more sugar than any other soda, right? Like
Mhm.
the example I gave to you for the soda thing was another kid drinking soda. So my daughter's like, why are other kids given soda and not, why can't I have it? And then I explain, well, different people, maybe they're not aware, and what it does. I actually went on and explained diabetes to my daughter. She didn't understand what that meant, but she's like, what is it? Oh, it's when your system, I really tried to simplify how your body breaks down sugar. And if your body is given too much sugar, it doesn't know how to process that much sugar. And so it breaks, like it becomes impaired. And you need to then take the insulin shot to help. So I kind of explained to her that too much of something is always not good. Anyway, I think, it's just about educating kids. I don't know, like, there's a lot of things wrong with our food system and, like is maybe another podcast on a different topic, right? But at least I think we as parents need to be educated ourselves and then kind of decide if what do we want our kids to also learn and, yeah, to take
And I
action.
think understanding too how crucial the microbiome role is, the ways it's impacted might give us a different perspective too, on the foods we're choosing because a lot of people may still kind of be in the calorie is a calorie, food is food type of departments. Like the more we learn, the more we realize, nutrigenomics and food as information and the turning on and off of genetic expression. And it really isn't just like the quality of our calories plays a very large role, not just the quantity. And so yeah,
Mhm,
that's a big shift, I think, for a lot of people to start to realize that as well. So yeah,
mhm,
thanks for digging in with me. And then before we go and wrap things up, I know this is a little like shift of gears, but I wanted to ask with you with being an entrepreneur and having kind of done a lot of startup work and entrepreneurial work. What would your advice be for someone who has dreams of starting a business or developing their own idea, business plan? What would you
mm.
say if you had one piece of advice?
Well, I think like we always kind of maybe doubt ourselves, right? Is this the right idea? Is this the right time? And there could be a million reasons why you wouldn't start doing something. I think the best kind of like thing I did was just kind of let's just dive in and
Mm,
if you really do feel like you have an idea that you're really passionate about, but also learn how to test quickly if there's really a need for it, there's really a market for it. And if your product solving the problem as you think it is, like because you might think in your mind that, oh, I have this problem, maybe other people have the same problem. Chances are yes, but I would do a lot of user testing and interviews and interview your customers and kind of if you can do a mock of the product that you're wanting to build and simulate that and get feedback early on.
hmm
My number one advice for people who do want to start their own companies.
Yeah. Make sure there's a need outside of your own need and then soliciting feedback. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. And so, okay. And then lastly, I wanted to ask, like, what is your vision for the future of Tiny Health? Can you also just like share the different testing options you have and what that looks
Mhm.
like for
Yeah,
you?
for sure. So we are the first test for mom and baby's gut. So mom during pregnancy or trying to conceive, there's the stool or gut test and the vaginal test. And then we are also the only test still today that has reference ranges for 3 years old and under.
Hmm.
So say test often and as early as possible if you can afford it, because that microbiome is a good baseline to start off and understand what the baby was born with and how it's developing over time. It could give you a lot of clues for sort of like if your baby does develop a condition later, or it can also hopefully prevent or reverse chronic conditions if your child does have one. So it's a stool test, very easy to use, that you sample directly from a diaper or a soiled toilet paper. And then we also have tests for kids older than 3, right? Because your baby's gut doesn't stop there. So we have a child test for 3 and to 18. And in adults as well. So dads can test. We highly recommend dads to also test. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. My vision for Tiny Health is that we eventually do become the standard of care for kids, for babies under 3. So when you're born, um, you go for a well visit, a pediatrician's office, you do get a stool sample taken to see what's there, if you do need bibs or you have bibs, and is there the right kind of bibs. So that is my vision. I hope in 5 years you will see this being a common thing at the doctor's office.
That would be amazing if that was the case. I would love that. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on. And the last thing was just share where everyone can find Tiny Health on Instagram or website, any other places that you
Yeah,
have.
on Instagram, we're at tiny.health, and our website is tinyhealth.com. Pretty easy to remember. Tiny for the tiny microbes in your gut, and also for tiny babies, but not
Mhm.
limited to that. And then if you want to write in with any questions, we are at hello@tinyhealth.com. I read a lot of the Tiny Health emails and the Instagram DMs as well. So feel free to write in if you have a question for me.
Awesome. Yes. And lastly, I'll say I offer the Tiny Health test with my super curious clients who are eliminating alcohol and a lot of moms working to conceive and become the healthiest versions of themselves or just like, looking to explore their gut after eliminating alcohol in ways they can just become the healthiest version of themselves. So I love everything you do with the gut health for the whole family. I think it's such a good testament to health really being a familial effort. It is because it's hard if we're not all on the same page. So, thanks for being here, Cheryl, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe, go follow Tiny Health, and make sure you get that gut in check, guys. All right. Bye
Thank
bye.
you, Katie.